Tonight, we're plunging into a chilling chapter of medical history, a time when the very intimate workings of the human body were misinterpreted with devastating consequences. Imagine a world where physicians believed your body held too much heat, where bad moods signaled an internal imbalance, and the bizarre cure involved a violent, forced release. You're about to hear how Tudor doctors warped pleasure into a twisted form of medicine, and why their strangest prescription wasn't just embarrassing, it was utterly deadly. It all began with the ancient concept of the humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. For centuries, every human ailment, from a simple sadness to painful swelling, was blamed on their imbalance. And while the familiar practices of bleeding and applying leeches were commonplace, a darker, more intrusive belief emerged among some physicians. These doctors, particularly those dedicated to understanding women's health, theorized that illness stemmed from retained seed, or, even more alarmingly, from a womb that literally wandered through the body when neglected. The treatments were shockingly consistent: a sudden rush of warmth, an uncontrollable tremor of the limbs, and a final cleansing sigh. Sometimes a midwife would assist, sometimes the patient was left entirely to the physician's devices. But the true horror unfolds when they dared to apply this method to the gravest of illnesses, like a raging fever. Welcome to the year 1520. You're lying on a crude straw mattress, your body drenched in sweat, each breath a struggle. The ominous presence of the plague has reached your quiet village, and your fever burns like hellfire under your skin, scorching your very essence. For days, you've endured bleeding, not from wounds, but at the insistent hand of a physician utterly convinced your blood is corrupted, teeming with malevolent humours. But now he approaches with something disturbingly different, an act that causes your mother to abruptly turn away, her face etched with revulsion, and your father to clear his throat, his discomfort palpable in the stifling room. Dr. Francis Hartwell, a distinguished graduate of Cambridge and a dedicated student of ancient Greek medicine, truly believes your salvation lies not in fervent prayer or bitter purgatives, but in the violent release of your body's most intimate tensions. "The seed," he murmurs, his voice low and clinical as he deliberately rolls up his sleeves, "must be expelled. This isn't a fever dream, no hallucination brought on by delirium. This is the stark reality of Tudor medicine, and tonight we are diving headfirst into perhaps the most uncomfortable and unsettling chapter of medical history, a time when doctors genuinely, unequivocally believed that orgasms could cure everything from hysteria to the dreaded Black Death itself. Before we descend further into this abyss of medical madness, let's take a brief moment. If you're ready to have your mind blown by history's darkest secrets, hit that like button. And please, subscribe, because trust me, you absolutely won't want to miss what comes next. So, settle in, dim the lights, and brace yourself for a journey into a world where pleasure was a prescription, where prestigious medical schools actually taught the anatomy of ecstasy, and where the fragile line between healing and horror was drawn in the most intimate places imaginable. Before we dissect the twisted theories that underpin this madness, let me paint you a vivid, unsettling picture of what you'd actually encounter if you were to step into Dr. Thornhill's private workshop in the year 1528. The very smell would assault your senses first, a pungent, heavy aroma of leather oil intermingling with something metallic and sharply acrid, the undeniable scent of brass instruments being meticulously polished daily. But beneath that, a deeper, far more unsettling aroma would emerge, something distinctly organic and profoundly disturbing that would cause your stomach to churn. The room itself would be lined with dark, imposing wooden cabinets, each one secured with heavy, intricate iron mechanisms. And within these locked confines, arranged with the chilling precision of surgical instruments, you would find devices that would make even a seasoned torturer blush. There would be ivory rods of varying lengths and thicknesses, their surfaces smooth and cold, glass spheres filled with shimmering mercury that warmed disconcertingly when handled, and complex mechanical contraptions equipped with hand cranks and adjustable pressure plates, their purpose horrifyingly implied. But the true centerpiece, the object that dominates the room like an altar dedicated to some dark, forgotten deity, is what Dr. Thornhill himself refers to, with chilling detachment, as his therapeutic engine. It's a massive, imposing wooden construction built with the brutal efficiency of a medieval rack, yet clearly designed for very, very different purposes. Thick leather restraints hang ominously from polished brass fittings. Adjustable platforms can be raised or lowered with chilling precision, and at its very heart, a mechanical device moves with the relentless, rhythmic pulse of a heartbeat when properly wound. This, you must understand, is not a torture chamber, though its appearance suggests nothing less. No, this is the very cutting edge of Tudor medicine, and every wealthy family in London is paying exorbitant premium prices to have their daughters treated here. Dr. Thornhill, a man of meticulous habits, keeps detailed notes on every single session. These aren't just superficial medical observations, they are precise technical specifications. How long each treatment lasted, which particular devices produced the most violent paroxysms, which patients necessitated the use of restraints, and which, disturbingly, submitted willingly to their cure. His handwriting is precise, almost clinically detached, yet between the lines you can sense something darker, something profoundly unsettling. These aren't merely medical records, they are, in a perverse sense, performance reviews, evaluations of his technique, chilling comparisons of different methods for achieving what he considers therapeutic success. Patient responds favourably to gradual pressure application, he calmly notes about 15-year-old Margaret Blackwood. Restraints are necessary once proper rhythm established. Crisis achieved after 27 minutes of sustained manipulation. Recommend bi-weekly treatments until matrimonial arrangements complete. The casual, almost bureaucratic tone is utterly chilling. He is describing what is, by any modern standard, sexual assault, with the same dispassionate precision he might use to document the setting of a broken bone. But here's what makes it even more deeply disturbing. Dr. Thornhill genuinely, unequivocally believes he is saving lives. In the chilling logic of his own mind, every single treatment he administers prevents madness, restores health, and fulfills his sacred duty as a physician. The muffled screams that occasionally emanate from his workshop aren't cries of pain or terror to him. They are, in his twisted perception, the very sounds of healing. And the worst, most unsettling part of it all, by the prevailing standards and beliefs of his time, he is absolutely right to think so. To truly grasp how Tudor physicians came to prescribe orgasms as medicine, you must delve into the very rotten foundation of their medical thinking. In 1520, medicine bore no resemblance to our modern understanding of germs or infections. It was built entirely upon a single flawed theory that had been painstakingly passed down from ancient Greece, vaguely refined by Islamic scholars, and then twisted into something almost unrecognizable by medieval European doctors: the theory of the four humours. According to this archaic system, your body contained four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, in this view, was simply a matter of keeping these humours in perfect, delicate balance. Too much blood, and you were deemed hot-tempered and lustful. An excess of phlegm made you cold and sluggish. Yellow bile, in abundance, rendered you angry and aggressive, while too much black bile brought forth melancholy and madness. Every single illness, from a common headache to the ravages of the plague itself, was merely an imbalance waiting to be corrected. Dr. Hartwell, meticulously examining your fevered body, would press his practiced fingers against your pulse, his brow furrowed in concentration, and then nod knowingly. Your blood, he would conclude, was clearly overheated, your yellow bile actively corrupting your natural temperament. But there was something else, something the ancient texts whispered about in careful, hushed Latin phrases: retained seed. You see, Tudor physicians firmly believed that both men and women produced seed, a vital, precious essence that absolutely needed regular release. In men, this necessity was obvious and visible, but in women the theory became darker, far more invasive, and deeply personal. Female seed, they believed, was produced within the womb and needed to be expelled through what they delicately termed the crisis. When this seed was retained, Whether through celibacy, widowhood, or simply insufficient marital relations, it would fester and corrupt, heating the body from within. This internal corruption, they argued, caused everything from sudden fainting spells to full-blown, incapacitating hysteria. And the prescribed treatment? The physician's duty was clear, if profoundly uncomfortable. Dr. Hartwell would have read this explicit instruction in the texts of Galen, the revered Roman physician whose voluminous works dominated medical education for over 1,000 years. Galen wrote extensively about the absolute necessity of seed expulsion, describing in clinical detail how retained semen in women would putrefy and poison the entire system. The alarming solution was what physicians clinically termed hysterical paroxysm, a sudden, violent release of tension that would supposedly expel the corrupted humours and magically restore balance to the body. In practical, horrifying terms, this meant manually stimulating the patient until they reached climax. But here's where the practice descends into true depravity. This wasn't considered sexual in any sense. It was considered surgical. Physicians approached female patients with the same detached clinical demeanour they would use to set a broken bone or lance a boil. They wore leather gloves, used olive oil as a lubricant, and kept incredibly detailed notes on the duration and intensity of each treatment. Some doctors even specialised in this particular practice, travelling from town to town with their medical bags filled with what we'd now immediately recognise as primitive vibrators, ivory rods, polished glass spheres, even sophisticated mechanical devices powered by intricate wind-up springs. The most successful practitioners were often, ironically, women, midwives and other female physicians who could provide these treatments without the immediate social scandal that male doctors might provoke. But even they approached it as pure medicine, meticulously documenting symptoms, tracking progress, and diligently billing patients for their therapeutic release. And it certainly wasn't cheap. A full course of hysterical paroxysm treatments could easily cost as much as a good, strong horse, making it a luxurious cure available only to the truly wealthy. But for those who could afford it, the results often seemed nothing short of miraculous. Women who had been bedridden for months with debilitating hysteria would suddenly regain their strength and vitality. Melancholic patients consumed by despair would visibly brighten and show signs of cheer. Even some cases of persistent fever seemed to show remarkable improvement. Of course, we now understand that this had absolutely nothing to do with expelled humours, and everything to do with stress relief, the natural release of endorphins, and the simple, undeniable fact that someone was finally paying attention to women's bodies in a way that brought pleasure instead of constant pain or discomfort. But Tudor physicians knew nothing of endorphins. They didn't comprehend stress hormones or the profound psychological benefits of sexual release. They only knew that their peculiar treatments worked, and upon this flawed observation they built an entire elaborate medical philosophy. Yet, there was one more deeply disturbing element, one that even the physicians themselves whispered about in hushed private tones: treatment dependency. Some patients, particularly young women from the wealthiest and most influential families, seemed to develop a peculiar, insatiable need for these sessions. They would return week after week, claiming their original symptoms had returned, begging for additional treatments, and describing elaborate, vague complaints that always seemed to necessitate the same intimate intervention. Their families, desperate and convinced of their daughter's fragility, would pay enormous sums, believing their beloved girls required ongoing medical maintenance. What these physicians failed to understand, or perhaps chose not to acknowledge, was that they had accidentally stumbled upon a fundamental truth about human sexuality, a truth that wouldn't be formally studied or understood for another 4 centuries. They had unwittingly created a physical addiction to sexual release in patients who had no other socially acceptable or recognized way to experience it. Lady Catherine Peaton, a prominent noblewoman who endured these treatments for over 3 years, meticulously documented in her private diary the strange fever that would consume her in the days leading up to her appointments. She vividly described intense physical cravings, profound emotional agitation, and an almost obsessive focus on her upcoming medical sessions that consumed her every thought. "I find myself counting hours until Dr. Thornhill can provide relief," she wrote with a chilling frankness. "The melancholy grows stronger each day, and only his specialized treatment can restore my natural balance." Her mother, she noted, attributed it to her delicate constitution, but Lady Catherine herself harboured a deeper fear. "I fear it is something darker." Dr. Thornhill, ever the clinical observer, documented these very cases as irrefutable evidence of his treatment's effectiveness. Women who desperately sought his services were, in his mind, undeniable proof that his methods addressed genuine medical needs. He never once considered the horrifying possibility that he might be creating the very conditions he claimed to treat. The most profoundly tragic cases involved young women who had been brought in for so-called preventive treatment, innocently designed to ward off future bouts of hysteria. These girls, some as young as 12 years old, were told they needed regular medical maintenance to ensure proper humoral development. What they actually received was systematic conditioning that would irrevocably shape their understanding of sexuality for the rest of their lives. Mary Blackwood, for example, began treatments at age 14 and never truly recovered. She became utterly unable to tolerate any physical contact, even from female servants assisting her with dressing. She vehemently refused marriage, claiming that the mere touch of any man made her violently ill. She spent her entire adult life as a reclusive invalid, supported by her family and attended by physicians who continued to provide maintenance treatments for her ongoing hysteria. Elizabeth Fairfax, treated from ages 12 to 16, developed what we'd now recognize as severe dissociative episodes. During any situation that reminded her of her medical sessions, she would lose awareness of her surroundings, sometimes for hours, emerging confused and terrified. Her family kept her under constant supervision, tragically convinced she was merely prone to inexplicable fits of madness. Catherine Thornhill, no relation to the physician, began treatments at 13 and became completely, utterly obsessed with her medical appointments. She would count the days between sessions, become intensely agitated when treatments were delayed, and beg for additional interventions. By adulthood, she was receiving treatments 3 times per week and was completely unable to function without them. These heartbreaking cases were meticulously documented by physicians as examples of successful intervention in difficult cases. The girls' ongoing problems were consistently attributed to their naturally delicate constitutions, rather than being recognized as the direct devastating consequences of their medical treatments. No one, it seems, connected the horrifying dots between childhood sexual trauma and adult psychological dysfunction. However, some of the more observant and introspective doctors were beginning to notice troubling patterns that profoundly disturbed them. Dr. Francis Whitmore, for instance, had always prided himself on his meticulous observation of patients, a trait that set him apart from many of his colleagues. Unlike others, he kept incredibly detailed notes, not just about the treatments themselves, but about his patients' lives, their families, and their broader social circumstances. What he uncovered in 1532 would haunt him for the remainder of his career. He observed that women who came from loving, supportive families, who had engaging intellectual pursuits, or who enjoyed some degree of autonomy in their daily lives, these patients rarely needed intensive hysterical paroxysm therapy. Their symptoms were consistently milder, their courses of treatment shorter, and their recoveries far more complete. But then there were the other women, those from strict repressive households, those kept in social isolation, those deliberately denied education or any meaningful activity. These patients, Whitmore noted with growing alarm, required increasingly aggressive interventions. Their hysteria was more severe, their treatments more frequent, and their dependency on medical care more absolute. Dr. Whitmore began to harbour a terrifying suspicion that the hysteria wasn't caused by wandering wombs or corrupted humours at all. He suspected it was caused by the very social conditions that systematically denied women any outlet for their intelligence, their creativity, or their inherent physical energy. His private notes from this period reveal a physician struggling with a terrible dawning realization. "I begin to fear that we physicians are not curing a disease, but creating one." He wrote, The women who need our treatments most desperately are those whose lives offer them no other source of stimulation, no other moment of attention, no other experience of their own bodily power. We are not healing hysteria. We are providing the only relief available to women slowly dying of boredom and neglect. But Dr. Whitmore, despite his profound insights, couldn't voice these explosive concerns publicly. To do so would mean destroying his entire career and directly challenging the fundamental assumptions of his entire profession, the very bedrock of Tudor medicine. Instead, he began to discreetly experiment with alternative treatments. He encouraged his patients to engage in reading, to take long, invigorating walks in gardens, and to engage in stimulating conversations about subjects far beyond mundane domestic concerns. The results were nothing short of remarkable. Women who were given genuine intellectual stimulation and allowed physical activity showed dramatic and sustained improvement in their hysterical symptoms. Many, in fact, stopped needing his specialized treatments entirely. However, when he cautiously attempted to discuss these groundbreaking findings with his colleagues, he was met with immediate, dismissive ridicule. Dr. Thomas Aldrich, a staunch traditionalist, laughed outright at Whitmore's suggestions. "Next, you'll be claiming that bleeding doesn't balance humours," he scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Women need firm medical intervention, not coddling and books. Their minds are too delicate for serious thought. That's what causes their illness in the first place." Other physicians, while more polite, were equally sceptical. They had built their entire practices, their reputations, and their considerable wealth around the unwavering belief that women's bodies required constant, meticulous medical management. Accepting Whitmore's radical theories would mean admitting that much of their work was entirely unnecessary, or worse, actively harmful. The financial implications alone were staggering. Dr. Thornhill, for instance, was earning more from his hysterical paroxysm practice than most noble families. The entire medical establishment had become financially dependent on the income generated from these treatments. Questioning their necessity threatened the very economic foundation of Tudor medicine. Yet Dr. Whitmore wasn't the sole physician harbouring these unsettling doubts. A small, clandestine network of doctors across England was beginning to notice strikingly similar patterns and arrive at strikingly similar conclusions. They met in secret, sharing observations they dared not discuss publicly. Dr. Edmund Hartwell had painstakingly documented that married women with affectionate, supportive husbands rarely required treatment, while those trapped in loveless arranged marriages needed intensive intervention. Dr. William Blackwood had observed that women who were allowed to manage household finances and make significant decisions showed significantly fewer hysterical symptoms than those kept in complete stifling dependency. Perhaps most disturbing of all was Dr. Robert Ashford's chilling discovery. Women who had experienced sexual violence often showed the most severe and intractable hysteria, but their symptoms worsened, not improved, with paroxysm therapy. He suspected, with growing horror, that the very treatments meant to heal them were actually re-traumatizing victims rather than providing genuine relief. These physicians, burdened by their consciences, faced an impossible choice. They could continue administering profitable treatments they increasingly believed were harmful, or they could courageously challenge the entire entrenched medical establishment and risk professional ruin, social ostracization, and financial devastation. Most tragically chose silence and compromise. They continued their practices but tried to make their treatments more gentle, less invasive, and more attentive to their patients' emotional needs. It was a cowardly middle ground that ultimately satisfied no one and genuinely helped nothing, but their whispered conversations and their secretly penned notes would eventually contribute to the growing storm that would ultimately bring down the entire flawed system. Margaret Thornfield was just 17 when the physicians delivered their chilling diagnosis. Her womb had gone missing. She had been experiencing what we would now immediately recognize as classic anxiety symptoms: a racing heartbeat, breathlessness, and dizzy spells that left her clutching at walls for support. But in 1524, these symptoms had a very specific and terrifying diagnosis: hysteria, derived directly from the Greek word for womb. Dr. Edmund Blackwell, a royal physician of considerable renown, who examined her, pressed his ear against her stomach and frowned gravely. According to the revered medical texts he had studied at Oxford, Margaret's uterus had literally wandered away from its proper anatomical position, drifting through her body like a lost animal, desperately seeking moisture and warmth. This wasn't metaphorical. Tudor physicians genuinely believed the womb was a semi-independent creature that could physically move throughout a woman's torso. Plato himself had first described it as an animal which longs to generate children, and centuries of medical scholars had meticulously built upon this bizarre foundation. When a womb became dry, through lack of sexual activity or insufficient seed release, it would supposedly begin to wander, pressing against the lungs and causing breathlessness, squeezing the heart and causing palpitations, or even rising toward the throat and causing choking sensations. The prescribed cure was to lure it back into position, and the chosen bait was, horrifyingly, sexual stimulation. Dr. Blackwell's treatment notes, meticulously preserved in the dusty archives of the Royal College of Physicians, describe Margaret's case in clinical detail, both fascinating in their insight into the era's beliefs and deeply, profoundly disturbing in their content. The patient was positioned supine, her limbs restrained with silk cords to prevent injury during the paroxysm. Sweet-smelling herbs were placed at the natural opening to entice the wandering organ homeward, while manual manipulation was applied to encourage the crisis. What followed was, in essence, rape disguised as medicine. Margaret would have been stripped naked, tied to a table, and subjected to what the physicians euphemistically called uterine massage, aggressive internal manipulation designed to physically force her womb back into its proper place. The process could endure for hours, with multiple physicians taking turns as fatigue set in. The goal wasn't Margaret's pleasure, it was her hysterical crisis. The violent convulsions that physicians believed indicated the womb's successful return to its rightful position. These treatments were openly performed in front of medical students, who took careful notes on technique. They were meticulously documented in medical journals with the same chilling precision used to describe surgical procedures. And they were considered so utterly essential that wealthy families would pay enormous sums to ensure their daughters received the finest hysterical treatments available. But Margaret's case took an even darker, more desperate turn when she failed to respond to these traditional methods. Dr. Blackwell, consulting with his esteemed colleagues, decided her condition required even more aggressive intervention. Her womb, they concluded, wasn't just wandering, it was suffocated, cut off from the vital humours that kept it healthy. The terrifying solution, what they called fumigation. Margaret was suspended over a brazier filled with burning herbs, while physicians used metal instruments to direct the acrid smoke directly into her vagina. The theory was that the aromatic vapours would restore her womb's natural balance, while the heat would encourage proper blood flow. When fumigation failed, they tried irrigation, flooding her uterus with various liquids, from warm wine to mercury-based solutions that we now know were highly toxic. Finally, in utter desperation, Dr. Blackwell attempted what he called mechanical restoration, using a specially designed device to physically manipulate Margaret's internal organs back into their proper alignment. The device itself, crafted by London's finest instrument makers, resembled a medieval torture implement far more than a medical tool. It consisted of metal rods, adjustable clamps, and a hand crank mechanism that allowed physicians to apply precise pressure to specific internal areas. Margaret survived the treatment, barely. Her family, oblivious to the true nature of her suffering, paid Dr. Blackwell's exorbitant fees and publicly praised his innovative techniques. But the young woman never fully recovered from the profound physical and psychological trauma of her cure. Sadly, her case was far from unusual. Medical records from this dark period are filled with alarmingly similar stories of women subjected to increasingly invasive and brutal procedures, all justified by the pervasive belief that their wombs were misbehaving animals that needed to be tamed. The most disturbing aspect of all, these treatments were often performed on children. Girls as young as 12, showing signs of what we'd now recognize as normal adolescent development, were diagnosed with virgin's hysteria and subjected to therapeutic manipulation, designed to prevent their wombs from wandering. Parents would often hold their own daughters down while physicians performed these horrific procedures, genuinely convinced they were preventing future illness. Medical schools taught these techniques as standard practice, and society, tragically, accepted it all as necessary medicine. But the worst, the most chilling revelations were yet to come, because if orgasmic therapy could cure wandering wombs, surely, they reasoned, it could treat even more serious conditions like the dreaded plague itself. While physicians endlessly debated theory and technique, a parallel, deeply unsettling industry was quietly developing to serve their specialized needs. Master Giovanni Benedetti's workshop had become the epicenter of a thriving trade in what were euphemistically termed medical instruments. But Benedetti wasn't working in isolation. By 1530, a clandestine network of craftsmen across England was producing highly specialized equipment for the burgeoning therapeutic market. These weren't amateur efforts. They were precision instruments, meticulously crafted by some of the finest artisans in Europe. Master Thomas Clockwright, renowned for his intricate mechanical timepieces, had adapted his gear-cutting skills to create wind-up therapeutic devices. His most popular model, chillingly named the Perpetual Relief Engine, could operate for over an hour with a single winding. Physicians could set the device to work on one patient while they attended to others, maximizing their efficiency and, crucially, their profits. The engineering was remarkably sophisticated. Variable speed controls allowed doctors to adjust the intensity of treatment. Interchangeable attachments accommodated different anatomical requirements. Some models even included musical mechanisms that played soft melodies during operation, supposedly to calm patients and encourage proper humoral flow. Master Hugh Metalsmith specialized in what he called precision therapeutic implements, handcrafted devices made from precious metals and exotic materials. His exclusive clientele included only the wealthiest physicians, those treating the most elite patients. A single instrument from his workshop could easily cost more than a skilled craftsman's annual wages. These luxury devices were often works of art as well as medical tools. Carved ivory handles bore intricate designs. Silver and gold plating prevented corrosion. Some even included jeweled settings that supposedly enhanced their therapeutic properties. Physicians would proudly display these instruments like status symbols, tangible proof of their success and sophistication. But the most disturbing development was the emergence of what craftsmen chillingly referred to as compliance equipment, devices specifically designed to restrain uncooperative patients. Master Robert Ironwhite's workshop produced elaborate restraint systems that could completely immobilize patients while ensuring physicians could still perform their treatments. These contraptions were engineered with medieval precision. Adjustable straps accommodated different body sizes. Padding prevented obvious injuries while maintaining firm control. Some even included gag mechanisms to muffle screams that might disturb other patients or passers-by. The craftsmanship was both beautiful and horrifying. Polished wood, carefully fitted joints, smooth mechanisms that operated silently. They looked more like elegant furniture than instruments of control, designed to fit seamlessly into the opulent medical clinics where they would be used. Master Iron meticulously kept detailed records of his commissions, including the precise specifications requested by different physicians. Dr. Thornhill, for instance, ordered restraints that could accommodate patients from age 12 to adult. Dr. Aldrich requested mechanisms that could be adjusted during treatment to increase pressure or change positioning. Dr. Blackwell commissioned a portable version that could be assembled in patients' homes for private treatments. These orders reveal the utterly systematic nature of what was happening. This wasn't occasional abuse by individual doctors. It was an entire industry designed to facilitate the sexual exploitation of vulnerable women under the guise of medical care. But perhaps most chilling were the innovation requests themselves. Physicians would describe problems they encountered during treatments and explicitly ask craftsmen to design solutions. Patients who struggled too much, who cried too loudly, who simply couldn't achieve the required crisis. Each challenge spawned new engineering solutions. Dr. Marcus Thornfield commissioned a device that could deliver controlled electrical stimulation, believing that lightning-like shocks would enhance therapeutic effectiveness. Master Benedetti created a steam-powered machine that provided more consistent pressure than manual devices. Master Clockwright developed a timing mechanism that could extend treatments for precisely measured durations. The intense competition between craftsmen led to increasingly elaborate and invasive devices. Each workshop tried to outdo the others with more sophisticated mechanisms, more effective restraints, more reliable operation. It was technological innovation in service of systematic abuse. The immense cost of this specialized equipment meant that only the wealthiest physicians could afford the most advanced devices. This created a two-tier system. Elite doctors provided superior treatments using mechanical instruments, while less successful physicians relied on manual methods. Patients' families were explicitly told that the mechanical treatments were more scientific, more effective, and more modern than traditional approaches. They paid premium prices for the grim privilege of having their daughters subjected to the most sophisticated abuse technology could provide. The craftsmen themselves seemed largely unaware of the true depraved nature of their work. They were skilled artisans fulfilling commissions from respected physicians. If the devices seemed unusual, well, medicine often required specialized tools. Their job was to create precisely what doctors ordered, not to question medical practice. But some craftsmen slowly began to feel deeply uneasy about their work. Master Benedetti, for example, wrote to a colleague in Italy, describing his profound confusion about the English medical market. They commission devices that seem designed for pleasure rather than healing, yet they insist these are medical necessities. The physicians speak of humoral theory and therapeutic crisis, but their specifications suggest other purposes. I fulfill their orders because they pay well, but I do not understand what illness requires such intimate mechanical intervention. His confusion was entirely understandable. Continental European medicine had never embraced hysterical paroxysm therapy to the extent that English physicians had. Foreign doctors who visited English clinics were often shocked by what they witnessed, reporting back to their colleagues about the strange and disturbing practices they'd observed. But the English medical establishment, entrenched in their beliefs, dismissed foreign criticism as mere ignorance of their advanced therapeutic methods. They were pioneers in applied medical science, they claimed, developing innovative treatments that more conservative continental physicians were simply too backward to understand. This professional arrogance, however, would soon be tested by forces they couldn't dismiss or ignore.